In 1961, 31-year-old Joan Rizz lived in Lincoln, Massachusetts, with her husband, 4-year-old daughter, and 2-year-old son. On October 24, Joan's husband was out of town, and her daughter went to a neighbor's house. When the girl returned home, Joan was gone, and her infant son was sleeping unattended. There was blood in the kitchen, and a trail of it ran outside to Joan's car in the driveway. The phone was ripped out of the wall, and the phone book was opened to the emergency numbers section. A bloody fingerprint was also found, which could not be matched to anyone. All signs pointed to an abduction, but some strange eyewitness sightings complicated this scenario. That afternoon, a neighbor saw a dazed-looking Joan running outside her house but assumed that she was chasing one of her children. Later that day, motorists saw a woman resembling Joan walking along Route 128. Even though the woman appeared to be bloody and disoriented, no one assisted her, and she was never found. Since Route 128 was under construction at the time, there was some speculation that she fell into an excavation pit and was eventually buried under asphalt. Things got even more complicated when investigators discovered that Joan had checked out over 25 library books about murders and disappearances throughout the summer. One of the books chronicled the story of a woman who disappeared and left blood smears behind. Since the Rizz family had moved to Lincoln from New York City 6 months earlier, and Joan gave up a publishing career to raise her children, one theory was that she became unhappy with her domestic life and decided to stage her own disappearance. If that theory is true, Joan Rizz has managed to stay off the radar for decades. In 1991, 50-year-old Adam John AJ Breaux was a well-liked citizen of Houma, Louisiana. He was a former alcoholic who had been sober for 8 years and went out of his way to help others with the same problem. On the evening of August 28, AJ left an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and stopped off at a convenience store to purchase some milk. After that, he vanished without explanation. 2 days later, AJ's abandoned car was found in a park across the street from where his AA meetings were held. His wallet, checkbook, and a bag containing $165 in AA funds were inside. That very same day, there would be some unusual eyewitness sightings of the missing AJ. One of AJ's friends claimed that he ran into him outside a convenience store. According to the witness, AJ looked unkempt and was nervously talking on a payphone. A red compact car containing 3 unidentified men was parked nearby. Shortly thereafter, another witness who personally knew AJ saw the same car drive past his house with AJ and the 3 men inside. 4 weeks later, a woman from the town of Lockport reported that an intoxicated-looking man fitting AJ's description had pulled in front of her house in a van and tried to sell her some frozen fish. The police also received an anonymous, cryptic note claiming that AJ had gotten drunk and shot himself in the stomach before his body ended up in the bayou. While the note was dismissed as a prank, authorities did not dismiss the possibility that AJ had a relapse and starting drinking again, causing him to suffer memory loss. However, the sightings of AJ with the unidentified men have led his family to believe he was abducted and are met with foul play. On May 31, 1995, 16-year-old Misty Murray told her parents that she was attending a band practice in her hometown of Godric, Ontario, Canada. Misty never returned home, and her friends said that there was no band practice that night. Misty was adopted, but since she'd recently made contact with her biological mother, there was speculation that she might have run away. However, the investigation would eventually focus on Misty's adoptive father, Stephen Murray. Since Stephen had been seen boating on Lake Huron on the day of Misty's disappearance, authorities came to believe that Stephen murdered her and dumped her body in the water. Even though Misty's body could not be found, Stephen was charged with her murder. However, the case against Stephen was complicated by 97 eyewitness sightings of Misty, which took place after Stephen was alleged to have killed her. In the weeks following Misty's disappearance, Several teenagers who personally knew her claimed to have spoken with Misty in Godric and in the nearby town of Clinton. There would also be sightings of Misty in Toronto and London, Ontario. According to witnesses in London, Misty had become involved in drugs and prostitution and left town with her pimp once her disappearance started getting publicity. In spite of these sightings, Stephen Murray still went on trial for his adoptive daughter's murder, but the case against him was so faulty that it only took 45 minutes for the jury to acquit him. The police faced heavy criticism for their investigation and were hit with a lawsuit from Misty's family, who claimed that they focused too much on Stephen and failed to pursue any leads suggesting that Misty was still alive. She remains a missing person over 20 years later. After her aspirations of being a model fell through, Bridget Williamson decided to become a registered nurse. She also got married and had a child, but Bridget's life spiraled out of control after she became involved with the wrong crowd and started abusing drugs. She essentially became a drifter and spent much of her time following the Grateful Dead around the country. The last time Bridget made contact with their family was in 1996, after a failed attempt at drug rehab in New York. She traveled to San Francisco, and her last confirmed sighting occurred in April 1997, when 23-year-old Bridget was arrested for prostitution. She never showed up for her court date, and no one knows what actually happened to her. Bridget's case would be rejuvenated when the San Francisco Chronicle ran a series of articles about the city's homeless population and made mention of a local young female drifter nicknamed the Crier. The Crier had tribal tattoos on her face and appeared to be a drug addict. She earned this nickname because she always seemed to be weeping every time she was seen wandering the streets. The Chronicle took a photograph of the Crier sleeping on a sidewalk outside Transbay Terminal. When Bridget's sister, Jacqueline Horn, saw the photo, she became convinced that the Crier might be Bridget. Jacqueline traveled to San Francisco in 2004 and circulated Bridget's photograph among the homeless community, and many of them seemed to think that Bridget and the Crier were the same person. However, Jacqueline never actually tracked down the Crier or got a definitive answer about her identity. To this day, no one knows what became of the Crier or Bridget Williamson. On the evening of April 25, 1988, 20-year-old college student Elizabeth Campbell was at her boyfriend's residence in Killeen, Texas, when the couple got into an argument. When Elizabeth's boyfriend refused her request to drive her home, she left on her own, even though she lived 50 kilometers, 30 miles, away in Lampasas. At some point, Elizabeth ran into a fellow college student, who agreed to take her as far as Copperas Cove, where he dropped her off at a convenience store. Since Elizabeth was still a long way from home, she phoned her boyfriend to come pick her up, but he once again refused. Elizabeth's time at the store would be the last confirmed sighting of her. She never returned home, and her family reported her missing. 6 days after Elizabeth's disappearance, there were 2 separate alleged sightings of her at a convenience store 137 kilometers, 85 miles, away. In both cases, she looked very nervous and was in the company of an unidentified man who wouldn't let go of her arm. 2 months later, there was another sighting of a nervous-looking woman resembling Elizabeth at a gas station 240 kilometers, 150 miles, away. The similarity of all these sightings led to some speculation that Elizabeth was abducted and forced into prostitution. In another bizarre turn of events, Elizabeth's purse would be discovered in the possession of the Crockett County Sheriff's Department in Ozona in 1992. It had apparently been found near an interstate approximately 290 kilometers, 180 miles, from where Elizabeth disappeared, but the police did not have an exact record of when the purse was found or who turned it in. Unfortunately, in spite of all these leads, Elizabeth Campbell has never been found.